Hey, welcome back to the Happy Cynics today. We thought we would jump in on one of the main themes of the upcoming election, which is what makes America great. And we're not really, well, I don't know. We could talk about what we think is great, but I read through a lot of comments by different people, and I think Isaac did. You did the same thing, right? I guess.
Yeah, I read some comments from people who have traveled in America from other countries, and
Yes, yeah, I read some comments from people who grew up here. So, what do you want to start with? What was the most common thing that you came across?
Well, the most common thing I came across was that America is so large and so I would say like decentralized culturally,
Right.
that there's just a lot to do here. There's a lot of experience that you can have in America that you really can't have anywhere else in terms of the variety of culture and lifestyle here.
Right. Yeah. Whenever, and this is what's interesting, because no matter what you read from either side, the first thing people say is America means freedom. And so it doesn't matter whether somebody identifies as liberal, conservative, or moderate, or whatever. One of the first things that people say is that what made America great and what makes America great is freedom. So you have, well, let's just keep going with this for a little bit. Because what I was going to say was, with the freedom, though, comes responsibility. But then this is where people vary on just like, to what extent do we like the individuality that's influenced, that's emphasized in American culture? Or have we gotten away from being more communally minded as much as other cultures? Because I think the complaints from the right are not that, okay, people should have the freedom to do what they want, but don't expect me to pick up the tab if they make a bad decision and or whatever. It's up to you to make it happen. So we give you freedom, but we're not going to accept responsibility for what happens to you either. I think that philosophy works as long as there are adequate opportunities for everybody. That really is kind of the issue, I think, that has come about. And I've talked about this, and everybody knows this. We've shifted away from being America was first primarily agricultural, like a lot of other places, but then America became very quickly mechanized during the Industrial Revolution. So America was one of the places where the Industrial Revolution is really what elevated this young country up above other places. And so we went to, more of an predominantly urban culture. But there was a lot of blue collar work. So it was a lot of assembly line. We went through the whole sweatshop phase where we went through first slavery, and black people were being exploited through that. And then after we got over that hump, then we went into sweatshop conditions in factories. And then eventually unionization and labor laws push back some of that. Okay, one of the things that made America great is you can come here, and if you're willing to work hard, you can have a decent life for yourself. The question is, are those opportunities really still there across the spectrum? Because if you look at a lot of the immigrants that came here in the past, you came here in the 1600s, 1700s, well, you just went out and started your own farm or whatever if you couldn't do anything else. So you just, a lot of people could do that, and there was a place for that. But now, like with things being so much grander scale, and we're more into a service economy, I guess, that becomes the question. I'm not saying America's not great in this respect anymore. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just wondering if that's a part of our greatness that's actually starting to teeter a bit because maybe there aren't as many opportunities at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale as there used to be.
Yeah, and I also wonder like how much historic precedent is there for people being able to prosper rather than just survive.
Right.
As a member of like the working class in America.
Right.
Because I'm looking back through history, most of the immigrants who arrive in America as working class folks don't make it very far.
No, they don't.
And that becomes a lot of the urban population is very poor inner city working class people, but they survived.
Right.
Now, I heard an explanation for some of the intergenerational conflict that America is experiencing.
Right.
That I thought was really interesting. And I'll have to go find my source for this because I don't remember it off the top of my head. But it was a guy who was talking about how the greatest generation related their experience of the Great Depression and World War II to the baby boomer generation.
Yes.
And how that relationship has now sort of colored the way that the baby boomer generation relates to Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. So when the greatest generation experienced the economic hardship of the Great Depression, the government policies of FDR, and then went immediately after that into World War II, they come out of those experiences with like a ton of trauma about how the world can just kind of crumble around you and explode, and it's very volatile.
Right.
And that basically traumatized an entire generation of people who then pass on that trauma to their kids as the baby boomers.
Right.
And because of those experiences, the politics and the policies that the greatest generation produced were all kind of towards the idea of a stable, safe, secure world.
Right.
So they created this world where stuff like the Great Depression doesn't end up starving people, where world wars aren't really possible anymore. I mean, their policies effectively stopped the Cold War from becoming World War III.
Right.
And then you have these generations of kids who grew up in that, but were still raised with the mindset of you need to be self-reliant and you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yes.
And so they think that, all these policies of, Social Security and social safety nets and all that stuff, that's just getting in the way of our individual prosperity. And that's how you get politicians like Reagan who want to tear all that stuff down.
Right.
All that stuff that created the economic prosperity of the 50s and 60s, because they've kind of grown up through that and not experienced the trauma that their parents did, and yet inherited the mindset of that trauma. That's why they're so against the helping those who need help when they need it.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that was a very fascinating interpretation of the history of, the last half a century of American politics.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. And well, here's the thing. The nature of business that's predominant in this country has changed in the last 50 years. And like I said, with manufacturing being now outsourced, okay, well, what do you do when you have more and more, like, so for up until the 1970s and 80s, I would say the 1970s is really kind of when it started. The 70s and 80s, like with the import of Japanese cars, that was like a big thing. Like if you go back and the World War II era, there was like a lot of things made in Hong Kong or Taiwan or Singapore. They were like little things. But as far as like major things like automobiles and appliances and electronics, this stuff was all made in the United States predominantly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the thing. All those years when we had immigrants come to this country in the late 1800s, well, even before, but especially the big wave of immigrants in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was all kinds of, just all kinds of factory jobs for them to step into. And again, if you were willing to work hard, you could, once the unions were in place and such, you could come, work hard, make a decent living. And yes, there was it wasn't like everybody had the mobility to move up to be upper middle class or whatever. But yet I think a lot of these people coming here came from situations that were worse. So even though the opportunities weren't as expansive as one might think looking from the outside of coming to America like this, land of promise of milk and honey, that everything's you're just going to have stuff, your coffers are going to be full all the time or whatever. It's not quite that, but yet let's just say even people coming up from Mexico. So even if you've got like Mexican immigrants, and I'm not saying this is any kind of a norm, but I'm just using this as a for instance. Okay. So we have some neighbors here on our block who are Mexican, who came here, and there's more than one family sharing a house. All right. Well, that for me, somebody who grew up here, that's not really that's not a desirable situation for me. I would hate to think of having to live and share a house with, two other families or whatever. But some of these folks came from situations where that's much more preferred than what the options that they had where they were. And so in that regard, America still is a land of opportunity to a great extent by comparison. Now, could it be better? Yeah, yes, it could be better. But here's what happens, I think, Isaac. Because we allowed big businesses to send a lot of, say, what I want to say is lower skilled labor jobs, and export and basically outsource those overseas to other countries where people were in situations where they'd be willing to work for next to nothing, because again, it was an improvement on what they have. All right. Just like people making, athletic clothes or shoes or whatever in these sweatshop conditions. Okay. Well, if we're going to help, so there's not the structure there. So the government has passed laws and eased restrictions. I'm not like a protectionist per se, that it's always got to be America first and we can't let people, we got to cut down the imports that are coming in and things like that and force everything to be made here in the United States. But yet at the same time, if we're not going to do that, then we have to provide some sort of social programs that give people a bit, at least a partial safety net and something to help them become more economically mobile so that they can get an education and they can move into a more skilled position. Like, I'll guarantee you, you look at like where I live. Okay, so this is anecdotal, I know, but like where I live, when we had a new roof put on our house, Okay, so we went with a local contractor, and it's a contractor that's been in this area for 2-3 generations. Okay, so they've been here a while. Well, half of the laborers were Hispanic guys. Okay, I'm sure that, you know, down the road, their ambitions for their children is not that their children are going to be basically walking around roofs, reshingling houses for their whole lives, that they want something a little better for their children. Okay. But here's the thing. What's the rich people, like our government officials, always, the rich have a way of even getting out of paying even their fair share of taxes. So they not only don't want to have to offer the jobs to lower skilled laborers in this country and pay them a decent wage, but then even when it comes to, so they're going to outsource and make more money by getting lower cost work done for them, labor, but then they don't want to even have to pay taxes into creating some sort of social infrastructure, social structure to help people in the lower socioeconomic class to be able to move up and better themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that, so in other words, I think what America at its greatest is a place of opportunity where people can work hard and move ahead. But here's the thing. If we're not going to, we need to have laws that somehow enable that to happen. And who ends up paying for the bill? Okay. It's not the very wealthy. They get out of paying most of their taxes one way or another. It's the middle class. So that's why you have all these middle class people, like a whole core of them, that are really upset because when somebody wants to come here and make something better of themselves, they can't do it strictly on their own because there aren't as many opportunities at the lower end as there used to be here 100, 150 years ago. And then who gets socked with the bill when we decide we're going to be humanitarian and we'll try to help them with health care and some social programs, education, maybe buy some food and the WIC, and things like that. It's the middle class that ends up picking up most of the tab. And that's created a class resentment between the middle class and the lower class. That's my analysis. Maybe I'm way off base here. But that's kind of my take on this.
So when the MAGA cult says, we need to make America great again.
Yeah.
And we're going to do that through Trump's policies.
Right.
How do you interpret that?
I interpret that as okay, so in terms of what we're talking about here, we don't want to be taxed to help support people who are coming here, especially the ones that are coming here illegally. And in fact, we need to cut down how many people are coming here because everybody knows that, unless you are a highly educated or highly skilled person, you're going to have to probably, if you are not a highly skilled or highly educated person, then you're probably going to have to work at least 60 to 80 hours a week to be able to make a decent wage. And that may mean holding down 2 or 3 jobs. Well, if we say, well, gee, that's not fair, people shouldn't have to work that long, these middle class folks would say, hey, you know what? If they want to come here, as long as they're not taking my job away from me, and as long as I'm not being taxed to help pay for their health care or education, then if they don't like what they're able to get on their own, then they can go back where they came from. I think that's how I interpret a lot of the rhetoric that's coming from the Trump camp.
I would approach it maybe a little differently. I
Okay.
think there are economic concerns, I think, amongst the Trump camp when it comes to what makes America great.
Right.
But I think primarily the ills of society that they point to is like eroding American culture.
Oh, yeah. That's
Is-
definitely. I was just limiting my comments to the economic part, but go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I think when they say make America great again, they mean they kind of harken back to the nostalgia of the more homogenous 1950s sort of culture
Yes.
of the American suburbs, because even in the 1950s, American cities were very diverse.
Right.
They were not homogenous at all.
No, but people were segregated.
Right.
That's what they
And-
want. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the cultural mixing
Mm-hmm.
that I think when they say make America great again, they want to sort of make it harder
Right.
for cultures to mix. I don't know if they would even say like we want to make it illegal, but they just want to make it they want people to stay in their own lanes
Yeah.
and not have to interact with people who are different,
Right. Right.
which I think is the exact opposite of what makes America great.
Yes. Yes.
Now, I think when it comes down to the economic side of things, even the Democrats are saying like, well, we need to increase American manufacturing and create more opportunities
Yes.
for the middle class.
Right. Right.
Republicans just have this like added, well, we're going to blame that on immigrants.
Yeah.
When if you talk to actual economists or sociologists, they all say immigration is good for the economy. Letting more immigrants in
Right.
is always good for the economy.
Right.
In maybe very niche scenarios, you get oversaturated with labor, but that's
Right.
not really the case here.
No. No, because if you have immigrant, like the only thing that would happen that would, like with immigration, that would hurt the average American worker is if we let a whole bunch of skilled laborers come in here, people that have more education and more skill than the average American does. I mean, we allow a certain number, like people from other countries, to come in and be doctors or lawyers or whatever. Okay, those are specialized fields. They're not, just your run of the mill occupation. It takes a lot of training or education, or say like an IT tech person. Okay. And there's so many like engineers and researchers and doctors and such that are allowed into the country every year to enrich the workforce. Now, if we had a whole bunch of people coming in here that knew a lot more and were better trained and better educated than most of the American-born people coming out of high school or maybe even some college or whatever, that would create a problem. But generally, when you have people coming in that are willing to do the jobs that other people don't want to do, they will end up spending money on other products, and that will end up, like if there's jobs that other people don't want to do, like crawling around on roofs and nailing down shingles, okay? And if there's that work to be done and people are willing to come in here and do that, or mow people's grass or whatever it is, whatever somebody wants to do. Like they used to have these stereotypes, from years ago, like, so Chinese people would come here, they either work on the railroad, they open up a laundromat, or they open up a restaurant. And like that was the stereotype. So like if somebody who was Asian comes in here, they're going to be doing one of those three things. See, but the thing is that I think what you're saying, that's what's really is the pushback. Because here's the thing: we say America the melting pot, but for one of the things that people forget. Or maybe they don't forget, and maybe that's the point. The point is that even though there's always been diversity in this country, that it was white Europeans who basically dominated everything, and I mean English speaking Europeans. I don't mean, like Germans, Italians, Poles, and other people that came here. They basically yeah, you're welcome to come here as long as you learn our language and you learn to kind of fit in with what we do. Yeah, we don't mind if you want to, if you Jewish people want to have a deli and the Italian people want to serve spaghetti, we like food. But we're not going to do all the other kind of celebrations that other, if Chinese people want to come in here, for example, and go along with our holidays and things like that, we just don't want them out there letting off firecrackers for their New Year and things like that. I mean, there was this kind of repression that went on, okay, and this segregation like we're talking about. The thing is now, you've got the younger generations, I think, who enjoy the interaction and the exchange. And now these other cultures are starting to influence how even native-born people here think about different issues. And you still have a core. I know there's more than just white people supporting MAGA, okay? But the vast majority overwhelming majority are white people, right?
Right.
It's not like a tremendously diverse group. And it really comes back to, honestly, we want our cultural preferences to dominate society at large. Even to the point now where if you can't make this argument because we were here first, there's that kind of narrative. Well, then that doesn't work. So now the next thing is you throw religion in. Well, this is a Christian nation, and the founding fathers wanted to be a Christian. Like, in other words, they're going to just use the name of God to hide behind to impose their culture on everybody else. I don't know that anybody is really anybody forcing somebody else to embrace somebody else's culture, except to say that you have to learn to get along with other people with whom you won't necessarily agree. It's just like, honestly, I can understand, say, if somebody running a bakery, doesn't want to attend a same-sex wedding ceremony. But I mean, really, is it really that much of a, it's not like somebody's building the bed where the marriage is going to be consummated just to bake somebody a cake and decorate it. Really? How would that be any different than like a restaurant that serves the couple a meal? Are we going to come down to that just because somebody doesn't agree? It's like if you, should hotels basically check and make sure that people check in, or they're all married and they produce a marriage certificate, or, at some point, you're providing a service to people. How does that, that doesn't necessarily reflect on you. If you are without discrimination, providing that, if you're going to start saying, well, I have the right to discriminate. Okay, well then how about discriminating across the board? Like, how do you know how all of your cakes are what kind of celebrations are they going out for? If you don't think Judaism is correct and the Jews were wrong for rejecting Jesus as the Messiah, would you refuse to bake a cake for a bar mitzvah? Really? I don't get it. To me, the Make America Great Again, that's what I hear. There's not really, when does really Trump or anybody else in that movement articulate what is great about, or what was great about America that's not great now? All you hear is about how terrible certain groups of people are.
Right. So I have a question that I think will be helpful for us to answer, but why is it that diversity and intercultural mixing is a great thing, because we have an older episode on diversity.
Yes.
Where we come down on the side of, and I'm just kind of trying to remember what we said, but where diversity is really a tool to be used. It's not like an end goal of itself.
Right.
And I think part of what makes America great is not just that, like, oh, well, we have diversity, but that people are free to engage with that diversity, right?
Right.
So yesterday,
or to even be a part of that diversity.
Right. Exactly. So yesterday, my wife and I went up to Chinatown,
right,
in Chicago, and went to we have a bakery there that we really like.
Oh, okay.
We live close enough that we can just run up there and grab some stuff and run back.
Nice.
And we drove around the city for a little while just because we like being up there.
Mm-hmm.
And we live outside of the city enough that, like, it's boring where we live. So we go up to the city, we're driving around, and it is one of those things where, like, okay, in Chinatown, most of the people around there are Asian of some kind.
Right.
They're not all Chinese.
Right, right.
But there are, it's close enough to some of the predominantly white and black neighborhoods,
right,
that there's a good blend of city representation.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, that I can drive 30 minutes from my house and be in a place that is, like, pretty diverse. And I would say, like, Asian cultures generally are more alien to us
mm-hmm.
than European or, like, Australian culture is not that weird to us. German culture is not that weird to us, but Asian cultures, because they're so far removed from our, like, even our language,
mm-hmm.
Are fairly alien, that I could go somewhere at night and be comfortable and feel like, oh, I'm welcomed here, even though I'm not part of this neighborhood's cultural,
mm-hmm.
like,
right.
norm.
Yeah.
That, I think, is what makes America great, is that it's diversity married to friendliness.
That was another thing I read that was a common comment from people, that the United States tends to be more friendly than a lot of other places. I think most American people do want to get along with other people. And that's what makes me so sad about this whole movement. Because I'll guarantee you, most of the people, even in the MAGA crowd, on a personal level, are great people, but they're buying into this kind of false narrative that Trump and some of his cronies are putting out there. I don't get it. I don't know what they're so afraid of. What they're trying to go back to.
To go back a little bit to the diversity and friendship,
yes.
and that sort of being, like, what I think makes America great, is that it's beyond just, like, if you are in a fish out of water scenario,
right.
I feel, in America, whether that's you're from a culture outside of American culture, or you are an American going to a place like Chinatown where it's not really American culture there. Most of the time, my experiences in those scenarios have been, if you ask a question or you ask to be introduced to the culture in some way, somebody will walk you through it.
Right.
So there's a willingness to share culture.
Yes.
Whereas, like, the first few times that we went up to Chinatown, because that's now kind of become one of our regular spots.
Right.
We went into this sushi place called Sushi Plus.
Okay.
It's great. If you like sushi, you should go check it out. If you live in Chicago.
Yes.
And it's a very different restaurant experience than most restaurants in America, even sushi restaurants, because it's rotary sushi. So everything's on a conveyor belt.
Oh.
And there's, like, there's a little bit of protocol in how the restaurant works.
Okay.
And every time you go there, if you're not a regular, they ask every single guest, is this your first time here? So they can explain how it all works.
Yes.
That, I feel like, is like what makes America, at least maybe in the more diverse parts of America, that's what makes America great.
Right.
Is like, you can go and be introduced to culture and be made welcome anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a strong contrast. Did you ever see National Lampoon's European Vacation?
No.
So they're in France eating at this cafe, and he's trying to, Clark Griswold, and he's trying to order in French. Well, then the waiter starts speaking to him in French, and they're putting subtitles, and like they don't know what he's saying, and he was like trying to order wine, and the waiter's like, "I'll bring you dishwater. You won't know the difference anyway." And he's like smiling at him, and they're all like, "Oh, thank you." But it's like, I don't think it would be that snooty. You really go to France, but still, like you say, in America, people do. They want to, as long, I think people do generally appreciate sharing each other's culture. The one place where I think people draw the line, though, is like, you've got to be America first. That's one of the things I've found interesting, as well. I don't know, but I do think America is a good place. I think America has a lot of good people. I think another thing has made America great is a strong work ethic. Now, in fact, it's been so strong that a lot of times, and maybe in a lot of ways, we carry it too far. A lot of us overwork ourselves, work ourselves to death, but that has been part of America's success, is because people are willing to really get in there and work hard at something, and work hard to try to achieve. Have you ever eaten in an Ethiopian restaurant?
No, but I've been invited to many times because there's one near my parents' house.
Yeah, you need to go.
Had the opportunity.
You need to go. Last time we were up in Chicago, our son took us to one of those, an Ethiopian restaurant, and it was quite an experience, and it was just really fascinating and thoroughly enjoyable, and the food was delicious, spicy, but I like spicy. So,
I would love that.
Yeah, but yeah, so there's, but anyway,
you eat with bread, right? Like there's no utensils.
No, there's no utensils. So it's like a thin type spongy pancake that you tear off pieces, and then you pick up what it is you want to eat, and then you eat it with this like flatbread type stuff, spongy flatbread. It's really, really good. But like you're saying, being able to have these experiences, and even just like, for example, the United States, and because of being such a big landmass as well, you think about even the climate difference between, like all the way from like up to Alaska in the Arctic Circle versus all the way down to Hawaii. And you've got different types of climates. You've got desert area, you've got mountains, you've got all kinds of streams and rivers. And there's like the Appalachian Trail for people, backpacking and hiking, and or just like the scenic wonders like the Grand Canyon. And there's so much here to appreciate.
Yeah, I think it would be, I think it's important as we sort of come towards our last few points here.
Right.
That we acknowledge the thing that makes any of the things that make America great possible, which is that America's, at least American culture, and I think the only thing that really defines American culture is that we value personal freedoms.
Right. Exactly.
And personal freedoms are consistently attacked by the platform of the MAGA crowd. You know, reproductive rights, the rights of like even consider like marijuana legalization.
Right.
That's a personal freedom that the right hates.
Yes.
There's so many examples of that.
Yes.
Because those personal freedoms are what facilitate the diversity that you can find in terms of culture. I mean, you could even break down to it as much as just like alcohol culture and stoner culture in America. And that sort of diversity, even on such a micro scale, those are only possible if the personal freedoms that allow them are protected.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yes, there are a lot of freedoms, I think, yes, that the MAGA crowd wants to roll back. At the same time, I think that they're afraid that their Second Amendment freedoms are going to be taken away, or at least that's the rhetoric. And I really do think that a lot of Trump supporters are afraid of the government overstepping its reach and controlling weapons. I think if you were to ask the average person, and I think there's even data to support this, and we kind of talked about this before. I don't think people, the average American from either party, really wants to see just anything goes when it comes to owning weapons, or the government is basically going to scrutinize how many guns you can own and such and such and such. But I think, like we were talking about, a good starting point is at least some basic restrictions for people that, are struggling with mental illness or something and probably should not have access to a weapon, at least a high-powered weapon.
But then you worry, I don't know, this isn't our topic, but you worry about people who already own weapons not going to get assessed for whatever help they need because they're afraid of losing their weapons.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there's pros and cons.
Yes. Well, freedom and being able to, live your own life, chart your own path. I think that's one of the things that makes America great. But here's the thing. Some of that greatness was it was kind of selective for a long time where, for example, if you were more mainstream, the more mainstream you were, the more freedom you had. Like, in other words, it was kind of a misnomer. Like, you're allowed, like, in theory, everybody has freedom, but that only goes up through certain culturally accepted norms. I think that's really what a lot of the Make America Great Again is behind a lot of it. Because as younger generations after the baby boomers, I would say even my generation, Generation X, is kind of divided between those of us that are okay. Here's the thing. I don't think, for example, minorities for many, many decades in this country, if not centuries, did not have the same level of freedoms that white people did. I mean, that's pretty obvious.
Well, I would say that's true even today.
It is. Well, here's the thing. I think younger generations are more willing to let people who have some kind of minority status, whether it's racial, ethnic, sexual, whatever, religious, and allow those folks to truly have their space. Okay. So we talk about a melting pot. Yes, the melting pot was like you give up kind of your individuality and become an American. You get melted down. into something that we're all mixed together as some kind of American alloy.
Yeah, now it's more of a fruit salad.
Yes. Yeah, it is. I really do think it is. I think that's kind of where it's going. And I think that is what some people are reacting against. They want everything to go back to where everybody was kind of fit in, like had to fit into a mainstream mold. They don't want to have to, because then that makes things more tentative for them. Like they don't want to have to, for example, they don't want to have to meet a trans person at an amusement park or at a ball game. If I can just be blunt and say it that way, I think that's part of it. They're afraid of having to use a public restroom at the same time that a trans person may be in there or something. I may be wrong about that, but that's just kind of my it's more than a gut feeling. I think I've read and heard a lot of comments along those lines.
Well, I think it comes from this sort of like subconscious knowledge that if you belong to the dominant group in society, your dominant status is protected in certain ways by the exploitation of minorities.
Well,
that the benefits you derive as the dominant group are a result of excluding minorities from the dominant culture.
Well, so go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
I think part of my generation's thing is we're all kind of realizing that we're all a minority status in some way or another.
Right.
That exclusion from the dominant group is really just kind of universal internal human ennui and angst and stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty universal experience to be excluded from the mainstream society in some way.
Yeah.
And that when we all start seeing ourselves as part of the minority status, we're much more open to others of different minority statuses.
Right.
So I think that's part of what you're saying, but also the reaction against it is that the dominant cultural stream is losing ground.
Right.
For the first time in American history.
Right. And it's, yes. And I think that, for a while, they were still the majority. And so they were willing to try to keep things under wraps through majority rule. But now that they are no longer a majority, there's no longer a majority in this country that wants everything to be uniform across the board, across the board. So now it's resorting to other kinds of, manipulation and such, and questioning the legitimacy of elections and trying to change voting laws so that some people can't vote, or it's more difficult for them to vote, because they don't want majority rule now. They want their minority to rule. And it's like the shoe's on the other foot, and they don't like how that shoe fits now. But I don't know, is anybody, well, maybe in certain ways, are we, so here's another thing. So we talk about individual freedoms. We're at a point in society as well where we talk about things like, say, the environment. That's something we just can't just be, or say like even COVID. I think that's what really pushed a lot of this. COVID really uncovered a lot of these imperfections. Okay? What I mean by that is that even we talk about freedoms, the individual's freedom has to be curtailed at some level in the interest of what's in the public, in the common good. But we've become so individualistic in this country that I've mentioned this before. I don't know that it's like more and more difficult to find people who are interested in the common good. People want to, like, okay, you're not going to tell me whether I can burn fossil fuels or not. You're not going to tell me what kind of vehicle I have to buy, et cetera, or whatever it may be. You're not going to tell me I have to recycle or I have to do this or that, or to wear a mask or to get a vaccination. I think a lot of it really comes down to that. So what makes America great, even that has its limits. Too much of any good thing can be harmful. And so as much as I value individual freedom, that can only extend so far. You know, I'm not against anybody's right to own weapons. But like we said on the last episode, when somebody starts carrying them into public, that to me that's where their individual freedom stops, because that's not in the common good. I don't want a militarized police marching down the street like an army either, or even the military enforcing. There's got to be happy mediums. I mean, it's like we don't want a police state, but then also we have to do something whenever there's a bunch of looting and rioting and things like that going on too. So, oh my, we just seem to kind of swing from one extreme to the other, and hopefully we can land in some kind of a reasonable approach to things. I don't know why so many of these things have to be politicized. And it's a conversation I just had with my father here this week, and he was saying about how society has changed so much since when he was growing up. And he said it used to be that it didn't matter which party, which party had the presidency. People from both parties got behind the president and stood behind the president, and we stood for the same values and things. But now everything is just all about politics. No matter, and that's why I said, even if somebody from one of the parties cured cancer, the other party wouldn't want to acknowledge it. It's really, really sad. We do need to go back to what made America great. But I think some of the things that some of the Make America Great folks think are great or made it great are not really what made it truly great.
Yeah, I do think that when it comes to the restrictions on personal freedoms, and maybe this is just my perspective because I was 6 when 9/11 happened.
Right.
So that I think was a catalyst for a lot of restriction on personal freedom for the American public.
Right.
So I've kind of grown up with this, like, things escalate and the government policy sort of comes up to meet the scenario.
Okay.
But then the situation de-escalates, but the government policy doesn't ever.
Right.
It's more of a ratchet than it is a pendulum.
Right.
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 You can tighten it and tighten it and tighten it, but it never goes back.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a one directional move. So that I'm hesitant to say that there should be more restrictions on personal freedoms.
Yeah.
And then the police have militarized in response to looting, but do they ever demilitarize?
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. Well, and that's that's really what I was driving at the end of the last episode. we have to start taking responsibility for our own towns, our own culture, and the behavior, and keeping our neighbors in line, not to a point where we all think that somehow we're the moral police over everybody else. But again, the more we can take care of ourselves, the less we'll have to rely on government to fix problems. Sometimes government is needed, but if citizens learn to be responsible and sensible, we should be able to be self-governing to a great extent. I just don't understand some people's mentality. There used to be, at least you don't see as much of this anymore, but I remember every once in a while, we live on a street across from an elementary school, you know where we live, and every so often, somebody will drive by and just throw trash out their window, and it ends up in my front yard. I'm like, there's so many garbage receptacles around. Why? What's the point of that? I mean, how difficult is it to just hang on to it till you go to some store or something? Everybody's got like a garbage can outside because nobody wants to have to clean up everybody else's trash and messes. You know, back in the early 70s, before we really got serious about it, there was people just like would throw entire bags of garbage out there, and it would just be all scattered and terrible. It just is senseless. I don't get it. That's just like people who, there were people like my wife, coworkers, who are in the medical field and they know better, but they didn't like it that the hospital told them that they had to get vaccinated because they didn't think the vaccine was really necessary to stem the spread of COVID. It wasn't like that they were afraid of getting epilepsy or something like that. It was just the fact that they didn't like being told that you are required to get a vaccination or else you're going to lose your job. And they end up losing their jobs. There were several of them that happened to. I don't understand. I don't understand that mentality. I really don't. I can understand if somebody was pushing too far. To me, I don't understand that. That to me seems like a pretty reasonable request.
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of like psychological explanations for that. You know, antisocial behavior,
right?
Pathological demand avoidance. There's all sorts of.
And this is a mental health outpatient facility too. All these people are working in mental health, so it's like, how could you not be self-aware? But that's my point though. If what will make America great is great Americans, right? Look, it's just like your own life. You don't wait for somebody else to make your life great. You make it great yourself. And if we want America to be great in certain ways, then it's up to us to do it. It's not up to elected officials or whatever. You know, who cares? Presidents come and presidents go. And even dictators come and dictators go. What a place is what the people make it. And we're all only responsible for our own destinies to a great extent. Well, anyway. Okay. So we did identify at least some things that we appreciate about America. And I think we talked about all the things that I read that people said. Was there anything else that you recall that you wanted to bring up?
I'll make one last. I want to respond to your last point.
Oh, sure.
That people need to take pride in their communities.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that makes America great is that communities are kind of free to define themselves however they want.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue with that is that we have to be given the freedom to create those communities. We have to take that freedom to create those communities. And we have to fight for that freedom to be in the communities that we want to be in. Right. So we talked last week about O Block in Chicago that used to be a housing cooperative.
Right.
And the city said, no, you can't do that. And the people who lived there were rather proud of their community they had built. That's just an example of anti-American. Well, we don't like that because it's communist, so you can't do it.
Right.
So we have to, like, there's that balance of what makes America great is our personal freedoms and the freedoms to be, create communities that we would be proud of. And I think that the antisocial behavior is sort of a result of people feeling like, well, it doesn't matter what I do because, I'll never have anything that I'm proud of because, we're just doomed to live in this slum or this ghetto or this, crappy small town or whatever it may be. It's that opportunity to create something that you can be proud of that we need. And I think there's a lot of facets of that could be improved through politics.
Right. No,
but they're all rolling back government regulation. It's not, we just need to ban woke behavior. It's none of that. It's like, well, how about we let people build housing that suits their community rather than just single family homes everywhere.
Right. Yeah, and you don't combat ideas if you disagree about something. You don't combat ideas by banning the other side from saying anything. You defeat ideas by debating and discussing them, and then being able to reason through those issues. And so in a society, that's the thing. It's an empty kind of freedom if it's a freedom that is basically won for you or handed to you because of somebody else being repressed. We should value our freedoms, but our freedom should not come at the expense of other people. In other words, my freedom to say what I want doesn't mean that Isaac has to shut up and can't ever give his opinion. Okay? But hey, he has the freedom to agree or disagree with what I'm saying, and that's the way it's got to work in society as well. If you want your ideas to prevail, well, then get out there and debate them. You don't need to shut anybody else up. Just push back and disagree with them and debate it out. But we all, at some point, have to decide that we are going to at least try to find common ground. If we're not wanting to do that, well, then you're not wanting to live in a part of society anyway. So just go somewhere else by yourself and quit bothering everybody else. That would be my advice. But if you want to be a part of society, then society means that everybody gets a chance to speak up and say their piece. And at the end, we have a debate and then we vote on it. And if you lose the vote, then you just keep debating and try to bring it up for a vote another time. And that's what these things are all about. I don't think the Roe v. Wade thing is over, for example. Just like, everybody was sure it was a done deal in 1972, 73, when that ruling came down. But it's not over, and I don't think it's over now. And I don't know that it should be over to a certain extent. Let's put it this way. It would be, John Stuart Mill said any idea should be challenged periodically so we can at least rethink and say, okay, are we still convinced this is right? Or do we have to rethink this? And that should be, same thing should be said about a lot of things, or all the things that we adhere to. So anyway. Okay, did I, anything else, any other directions you want to go before we wrap this up, Isaac?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it.
Okay. All right. Well, we trying to make our podcast great, and we appreciate you. And make your life great and extraordinary. And let's all do what we can to just be good neighbors, good citizens, and just good people. And try to do what we can to encourage one another and to enjoy the freedoms that we have. And again, give our appreciation to the people that have made sacrifices so that we can have these freedoms. That is true. And there's always people that want to stifle freedoms. We have to keep pushing back against that, regardless of what form it comes in. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as always, you can reach us at thehappycynics@gmail.com. We've enjoyed this, and we hope you have too. And we hope you all have a great day. Take care. And we're looking forward to talking to you again very soon.